From the streets of London and the backroom and basement clubs to front pages and the living rooms of the nation and beyond, the Sex Pistols' rapid rise was the story of a band out to change the way people thought, dressed and acted. A band out to destroy rock and roll as we knew it. In a little over 2 years, this quartet threatened to bring down the twin totems of the British monarchy and the political establishment. Along the way, they galvanized a new generation of disaffected youth to rise up and take control of their own destinies in the name of punk. Few bands can truly claim to have changed the course of their culture, but the Sex Pistols are undoubtedly one of them. This is how they did it.
We're brought up to believe that pop culture peaked in the 60s and there wasn't going to be anything left.
But they changed everything, you know, that's it.
We was industrious lads, you know, we weren't sitting on our asses, but we wanted to do something.
Get up!
It started in London in the mid-70s when Britain was in a state of cultural decline and economic turmoil. The striking unions were embarking on 3-day working weeks as the government struggled to control them, and vast piles of uncollected rubbish accumulated in the streets. Race hate was on the rise, unemployment was reaching new highs, and the music was dull.
In 1967 there'd been the kind of flower power and hippiedom, and it was going to be free love, and you could, you know, smoke joints, and it's going to be black and white people all going to live together, and it was all going to be lovely. And I guess 10 years after all that happened, society was probably the same as it was in the 50s or 60s, but probably even worse.
A very depressive time, you know. The youngsters, you know, just there was no hope. It was very bleak. They couldn't see what the future was, and they were looking for something to latch onto. You know, musically at the time it was all, you know, Emerson, Lake and Palmer and, you know, ELO and, you know, all these big punk rock bands.
A lot of the kids were sort of glam fans, but Bowie had moved into kind of stadiums now, so they felt that he wasn't theirs anymore.
The initial power, the burst of rock and roll from the 50s had kind of worn out, gone through the hippie thing, so by the time you get to 74, 75, it run out of energy.
And there weren't much going on. You know, the glam rock thing had died down. There was all these big bands you could go and see at Wembley if you kind of could be bothered. You know, it was the 16 Wives of Henry VIII and On Ice. You know, what's that got to do with us? You know, like 25-minute long songs. It was bollocks.
And also the other side of that was singer-songwriters, generally from the hippie scene originally, but now writing quite sort of whingy stuff about how it had all gone wrong, which they seem to be benefiting from financially at the same time. A total case of cake and eat it. There needed to be something else, which was something much more street level and accessible for the young rock fan.
1, 2, 3, 4.
That change came in the shape of punk, whose roots in Britain lay in fashion. Specifically a clothes shop called Sex, run by Article graduates Malcolm McLaren and designer Vivienne Westwood on the fashionable King's Road.
The very important thing about Malcolm McLaren, which he understood very wisely, when kids wandered into his shop because they were bored and they were quite interested in what he was selling, but they didn't have any money to buy anything, he let them hang around. He didn't throw them out. He understood absolutely that having these kids hanging around, something cultural might coalesce. Glenn Matlock was working behind the counter on a Saturday.
It was a weird place. It was like this. It was set in World's End, and down the road you had Granny Takes a Trip, where the Rolling Stones and the Faces got their kind of dandy fashion clothes from. Down the road the other way you had Alcasura, where all the glam rockers got their stuff, and then there'd be Anthony Price and Brian Ferry swanning past. And Malcolm thought they was all a bunch of tossers, so we did too. They were all multi-millionaires, or we thought they were, and we didn't have a pot of piss in, but we kind of laughed at them. You know, you'd see them in the pub. And it just gave us a good attitude right from the get-go. And then Steve and Paul started coming in. Steve mainly to nick things, I think.
Steve and Paul grew up in Shepherd's Bush. They went to school together. And while Paul had a fairly nice, grounded kind of upbringing, Steve, for want of a better expression, was a troubled child from a broken home who kind of found solace in being a little bit of a lovable rogue. And, you know, it was shoplifting, it was nicking cars, it was all this kind of thing.
And they'd go down to the gigs, and Jonesy would borrow a few guitars and things, maybe borrow a few microphones. And this is how he got the gear together to put the band together in the first place. So they're living the rock and roll dream. I think that was the dream to get out. You're either a boxer or a rock and roller or a footballer. And he's actually not a bad footballer, but he's never going to be a professional footballer. So rock and roll was a route for him.
And Steve and Paul had a band going, and I think Paul's brother-in-law was in the band but as a bass player, but he weren't turning up or taking it seriously. I don't think there was anything to really take seriously at that stage, but I overheard them talking because they was trying to get Malcolm involved somehow. And I said, well, I'm playing bass, you know, I'll come down and have a play with you. So that was it. So we formed the band.
Then I think McLaren, you know, thought that there's something going on here. You know, the fact that they wanted to do something. I don't think maybe music was his first thought, but it became a way for him to export his ideas and to sell himself. You know, the guy's a egomaniac and certainly an entrepreneur, and that's what he wanted to do. He was just as angry as everybody else that he, you know, was failing and wanted to succeed.
Well, he knew that he had these guys back at the shop. He had Steve and Glenn and Paul, and he wanted someone to kind of front the band. And then suddenly this green-toothed Dickensian character walked in, and the rest's history.
Lydon was charismatic and sported a look totally at odds with his contemporaries. His hair was cropped and dyed green. His clothes were homemade or accessorized with pins, tears or slogans. It was a look born out of poverty and disgust, and it was enough to gain Lydon an audition, singing along to Alice Cooper's 18 on the Sex Shop jukebox. Though a tuneless rendition, Lydon contorted his body and threw himself around, a strange, sinewy collision of Iggy Pop and Richard III, offset by a manic glare that was a result of a bout of childhood meningitis. Jones gave Lydon a new nickname, Johnny Rotten.
He was bored of rock, because rock had got really, really boring. So the Pistols for him was just a chance to put two fingers up at rock music and just like basically take the piss out of it, really.
I don't have any heroes. They're all useless. Well, there's no bands around, is there? None. None that are accessible.
You know, everything about him was kind of like, there was this sort of self-hate, but it wasn't in a way. I think it was more interesting than that, because it was kind of like saying, look, I'm right, you know, all right, you think I'm the kind of like the scrawny, snotty, ugly little runt, but actually, you're all wrong. I'm actually brilliant, and what I believe in is right.
The band were far from accomplished, but they had attitude, ideas, and, thanks to McLaren, a rehearsal space in Soho's Denmark Street.
There was a lease for sale in Denmark Street. It said Tim Panell. And Malcolm said, call him up, offer him £1,000 without seeing it. I thought, called the bloke up and I said, look, I think my mate's married, but he's offered you £1,000 without seeing the place. And the guy said, oh, I think we can talk business. So we went to check it out, and it was this place out the back of one of the music stores in Denmark Street. And then we had a base, you know, somewhere to live and somewhere to rehearse. It was like on 2 floors. You know, and then what we would do, we would go, you know, we didn't rehearse for long, but we would meet up practically every day. It was a base, and we would knock an idea around. You know, I'd bring in something, and oh, that's all right, I'm not sure about that bit, and Steve had, oh, I've got an idea, I'm not sure about that bit, so let me change this around a little bit, and then John would have a bag of lyrics, you know. Pretty Vacant was one of the very first songs.
It just has a great build to open. The track has a great build. You know, and then the smash chords coming in. And you know, there's no point in asking, you got no reply. You know, we're so pretty or so pretty vacant. This is what we are. Right? Okay, we're pretty vacant. We're pretty vacant. We're useless. We're nothing. We haven't got any jobs. There's no hope, whatever. And you know, we've got nothing really to say. Okay, right? That's exactly what we are. But that's not going to stop me speaking my mind.
It was their most successful song in really drawing the flair wearers into the whole kind of bondage-strided world of punk rock. I think a lot of floating voters were pulled in. It seduced the mainstream because it had a lovely Glenn Matlock tune. You know, that is the great thing about Glenn Matlock. He gave them the tune to Pretty Vacant. If he'd only given them that, you know, job done. It was absolutely brilliant.
I mean, Glenn Matlock's probably the most musical proficient in the very, very early days. A really good bass player, probably a bit overcomplicated, you know, some of the bass lines he's played, but a really great songwriter as well. Glenn actually wrote the lyrics for Pretty Vacant as well, which people forget. And they're some of the best Pistols lyrics, aren't they? It's, that's the anthem, pretty well sums up the Pistols, and he wrote the words, but I mean, he hardly ever gets the credit for that, does he?
The Pistols began gigging around London during the early months of 1976. It was a time when the wrong haircut could get you beaten up, but also get attention. And the Pistols got both in abundance.
I set up the first couple of gigs. I set up one at Central School of Art, and then I set up another one at St Martin's School of Art. It was just across the road from where we was rehearsing.
I think it was just in the common room there, you know, played to about 12 people, supporting Bazooka Joe, who was actually fronted by Adam Ant. It was Adam Ant's band before he put the Ants together. And after the gig, Adam left Bazooka Joe and started putting the Ants together because he was so blown away with the Pistols. But basically their attitude, you know, right from the start they're on stage and lines insulting the crowd. They don't care if the crowd likes them or not. There's not, when I say crowd, there's 10 people. There's no one there at all. Just a few art students and Glenn who got to come and see the band.
Their followers were, you know, very small in number, and then it sort of grew and grew. People realised, they thought, God, this looks good. It looks good. It sounds good. It feels good. But it was a very sort of small number of people to begin with, and it kind of, but it took, I guess, it took 6 or 7 months for it to kind of build up any kind of real momentum.
Some funny things were happening. He said, oh, we were playing at some college up Finchley Road. Well, okay, so we'd got a little van together and we go up there, and they'd never heard of us, but we was there with all our equipment. No, we're booked. Malcolm's told us, you know, like we played, and then we went somewhere else. No, we've never heard of you, and it happened about half a dozen times. And I reckon Malcolm hadn't booked his gigs at all. He'd just gone through Time Out and seen a gig on, and there's no support mentioned. You're playing there.